In this tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how to glaze a cup with just simple store-bought glazes. The first thing you need to do is choose which colors you're going to use. Generally, it helps to have a little sketch of your sculpture and then write down which glazes you're going to use so that if you have to stop midway through something, you can write down, oh, I've done this many coats of glaze and with this color. That way you always have a good idea of what's happening with your sculpture. So to get started, what we're going to do is I'm just going to paint this whole cup white. To start with the glaze, we need to stir it. So sometimes the glaze kind of starts to separate inside of the bottle, and just take a clean paintbrush or a stir stick and just stir it up, mix everything back together. Make sure there aren't any chunks. If your clay is kind of old, sometimes it starts to get very thick. And if that happens, you just need to add just a little bit of water to kind of loosen it up again. Once we're all stirred up, scrape off the excess glaze. We don't want to waste any of this. And wipe off your brush. And now we're ready to get started painting. So if you are doing a cup like me, you want to make sure that you glaze the inside of your cup. If you don't, you won't be able to drink out of it. Before you start putting your glaze down, you really want to make sure that there are no crumbs. So at this point, it's a good idea to maybe just wipe everything down. Get any dust off of your sculpture. Alright, and we're ready to start. So, just like with painting, you want to choose the right brush for the job. So since I'm painting just one large coat of the same color, I'm just going to use a large brush. If I were doing smaller details, I'd be using a smaller brush. So when I'm painting, I want to try and get a nice, smooth, even coat. And the clay absorbs the moisture of the glaze very quickly, so you're going to notice it's starting to become kind of chalk-like and rough as you come along. Another thing you might notice if you're not very familiar with ceramics is that glazes may not always be the color that they end up being after you fire them. For example, like many blues look kind of red or violet. Many greens tend to be kind of a brownish, reddish orange color. And that's just because of the chemicals that are, or the minerals that are in the glaze. So, for example, greens tend to have a lot of copper in them. And if you are familiar with the Statue of Liberty, you might notice that it's green. That's because it's made out of copper and it has a patina on it. So we use these sort of chemical changes to create specific colors. So don't be freaked out if you want a dark blue and it comes out pink. So just be aware that when you fire it, it's going to change colors. So always look at the test tiles first to make sure you're getting the color you want. So now you can see I have my first coat on here. And when we do our glazes, we want to have 3 even coats. And you want to let it dry in between each coat. So as I'm waiting for this to dry here, I'm going to paint the outside, and then I'll come back and paint the inside. I'm going to hold off on painting the handle until last so that I have something to hold on to without getting glaze all over myself. Alright, so we have 1 coat down on the cup. You may have noticed I did not paint on the bottom, and that is because the glaze turns into liquid glass in the kiln. So if we have glaze covering the bottom and it turns to liquid, when it hardens back up, it's just going to meld itself to the kiln shelf. And we really don't want that to happen, because then we'd have to use a chisel and a hammer to get the cup off of the kiln shelf. Generally that breaks both of the items. So what we want to do is, if we do get any glaze here, you might see that there is just a little bit of glaze right around the edges. When I'm all finished, I'm going to take a sponge and I'm going to wipe this off to kind of clean everything up. So now that I've finished this first coat, it is dry on the inside. You'll notice it's all kind of chalky looking. I don't see any wet areas. So that tells me I'm ready to go with my second coat. So I'll just follow this same process 2 more times to get a total of 3 coats. Once you have everything painted with 3 coats, you want to make sure that you wash your brush out very well with soap and water. You don't want to contaminate any other glazes if you're using the same brush and going to another glaze. If you contaminate it, you never know what's going to happen. You might end up with muddy colors. You might end up with something looking like a burnt casserole. So it's always a really good idea to make sure your brush is as clean as it can be, nice and dry, and then you just want to make sure the rim around your glaze is as clean as you can get it, and screw the lid on tightly. You don't want to only put it on halfway and then someone else grabs it and it spills all over. So just keeping it nice and tight, clean, and ready for the next person. Once the cup is all dry, you can take your damp sponge and just hold the cup and the sponge, or you could set the sponge down on the table and just run your cup back and forth like this, and that cleans right off the base there. That's all you need to do to clean the base. If you get glaze anywhere else where you don't want it to be, the sponge works well to take that off too. Some things to take into consideration if you're doing different colors. For example, on this cup, I have some subtractive elements here where I've carved into the cup, and I would like that recessed area to be white, whereas I would like the letters to be a different color. So what I did first was to paint in the area, and I wasn't really that concerned about getting anything on the top areas, because there is a technique that I can use to kind of keep things clean. So I've put my 3 coats down, I've let that dry, and now all I'm going to do to get the white glaze off of areas where I don't want it is to take a sponge and just gently wipe off around the top areas. So as you can see, I got the majority of the glaze off of the top without harming the inside a little too much. I might touch up this spot just a little bit where the sponge got inside, but otherwise everything else is cleaned off enough for me to be able to paint it with another color. So those are some ways you can work with different colors. Remember, you don't want to be mushing your colors together, so you want to have a nice clean line in between them, but you also don't want to have any gaps, say showing the raw clay between the 2 glazes. So you want to be able to cover it up really well. And once everything is glazed and ready to go, then you're ready to fire your sculpture for the second time.